Hi friends, welcome to my channel, Pumpkin Hollow Quilts. My name is Olivia. Today's video is going to be a little bit different content-wise than what I typically put out. For many years, I've been making cross-stitch content, and I decided that I wanted to try to separate cross-stitching and quilting from each other. Typically in an update video, I will share whatever cross-stitching I've been working on, finishes, progress, that kind of stuff. And then at the very end, I sort of squish quilting in, again, whatever I'm working on or finishes, progress, what have you. And I always felt really bad because a lot of times it's only about a 5 to 10 minute clip that I attach at the end of the video. And I just feel like there's so much left out. A lot of questions that I would get about the quilts themselves or the fabrics used or the inspiration and that kind of stuff. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to start my very first Quiltytube video sharing the patriotic quilts that have been hanging up around my house since May. But before I do that, how about I introduce myself a little bit better? So my name is Olivia. I live in the Pacific Northwest, more specifically the Willamette Valley of Oregon. I've lived here my entire life. I started quilting over 20 years ago. I started when my daughter Allison was 6 months old. And I would go to my grandma's house on Saturday because my husband worked that day. So my grandfather would entertain Allison while I learned how to quilt. And basically the only time I really had to deal with her while I was quilting on those Saturdays was when she needed to eat or be changed. My grandfather would just hand her back to me. I would take care of business and then hand her back, and I would resume my lessons. My grandma taught me. Those first few lessons are very special to me. Shortly after I began, my grandfather passed away, and so that was just such a huge blow to the family. And then it was a while after that I picked up the lessons again. Basically, my grandmother showed up at my apartment and she brought a sewing machine that was used, set it down on my table and said, let's keep going. So my lessons resumed probably about a year after that, maybe not quite a year, but it's been such a fun adventure. Definitely over the 20 plus years that I've been quilting, my aesthetic has changed, just like with any hobby. You know, what you first loved or first worked with, it might not be your thing now. So it's really neat to see the evolution of my quilting. And even looking at those first few quilts and the many mistakes that they had to the quilts now, just comparing them and seeing that journey has been incredible. I'm so incredibly blessed that my grandma took the time to teach me how to quilt. She's taught me so many things, not just quilting, cross-stitching, hand embroidery, baking, canning. I mean, just about everything that I do, the origins, I can trace back to my grandma. My grandma just turned 87 years young this past June. She's doing amazing, and I'm just so very blessed that I still have her in my life. So one of the first things that my grandma and I did quilting wise together was we did every single shop hop that was in the Willamette Valley. There were so many shops in our area that they typically, you would have the southern shops that would do a shop hop, and then a few months later all the shops to the north would do them again, and sometimes a group of those two would do shop hops. So it seemed like every couple of months we were, you know, jetting off across the countryside, gathering blocks and fabrics and all sorts of things. And it was such a wonderful memory. And I was always drawn to Civil War Reproduction Fabrics. And so a lot of the shops to the south carried those. And although I didn't have a big budget for fabric buying, I would collect fat quarters, and I would try to put like little pieces of them into the quilts, because a lot of times I would purchase my fabrics from Joann's. I always recommend people do that when they're first learning how to quilt, just because it's a little bit more economical. And then once you learn how to quilt, then I say, now let's go to a quilt store. But I would try to incorporate a lot of those Civil War reproductions into those early quilts. Now, as I progressed as a quilter, I joined a quilt group. And one of the quilts that I took there was a Civil War reproduction quilt that I'm going to show here shortly. It was one of the ones where I had sort of scrimped and saved to be able to purchase only Civil War reproduction fabrics for this quilt. It was a patriotic one, and I nicknamed it my Gettysburg quilt. But I took this quilt to my quilt group, and I was immediately chastised by one of the members of the group for using what she termed as old lady fabrics. And so I felt very embarrassed, very uncomfortable. And, you know, with any hobby, when you first get into it, and those first, as you're growing, and those growing pains and things like that, you're very influenced by your peers. So I thought perhaps she was right. And even though I absolutely love Civil War reproduction, I ended up turning my focus to other color palettes and other fabric lines and other designers, which was great because I got to play with other fabrics that other designers create. And although the quilts that I created, I enjoyed making, I learned a lot. They really just didn't solidify themselves into my heart. A lot of them I gave away after time went on, or I sold them. And I always felt sort of lost when I was collecting fabrics for a quilt, because I would immediately turn to the ones that I loved, and then I would turn away from them over here, if that makes any sense. So for many years, I sort of denied myself the opportunity to work with the fabrics that I truly love. And I worked with quilts that, again, although I enjoyed working on them, I enjoyed the finished product, I wasn't in love with them. And I lost my quilting mojo about 2017, which was such a bummer. So for several years, I didn't make a quilt. Instead, I focused on cross stitching. So I mean, the trade-off was good. I expanded into another hobby, and I've grown in that hobby too, and I've enjoyed it and I've loved it, and now I'm stitching what I love to stitch. And in 2020, right before the pandemic, my grandma and I did a shop hop. We hadn't done one in a couple of years. And I walked into this shop down in Brownsville, Oregon, and I saw a quilt that was made out of all Civil War reproduction, and I fell madly and passionately in love with it, and I felt the quilting mojo come back into my body, and I immediately purchased the kit, and I haven't looked back since. I've been fortunate, and I've had so many friends across the world send me Civil War reproduction fabric to help me build my stash, and I love playing with all of those beautiful fabrics and kits that they have so very generously sent me. And I just have been so absolutely blessed by so many wonderful friends who helped me rediscover that passion in Civil War quilts. And now I just gotta hope that there's still designers that will continue to design Civil War reproduction fabric. So the first quilt that I am going to show today is the one that is hanging up behind me, which is called the Constitution quilt. I will insert a photo of it. I toyed with the idea of taking it down and putting something else up behind me, but I just really love this look, and I want to enjoy it for a few more days before I take it down. But this quilt I purchased as a kit from Primitive Gatherings, and I also purchased the book. It is called Stars and Stripes Gathering by Primitive Gatherings. This book is still very much available on the Primitive Gatherings website, and it's also chock full of amazing Patriotic Quilts. The fabric line that was included in the kit is called the Stars and Stripes Gathering fabric line. You can get bits and pieces of it still around the internet, but again, this came out in either prior to 2020 or in 2020, so it's a little bit harder to find. I still see parts of it, you know, when I'm searching for red Civil War fabric or shirting fabrics, I will still find parts of it. I don't know if you can still get the little stars that sort of make up the log cabin block. However, you could probably sort of rig something up, maybe do a little bit of hand embroidery or hand applique and put those stars in the middle of those log cabin blocks. This quilt was so incredibly fun to put together. The only thing I didn't do is the directions have you spray them very heavily with starch. Some of those starches, if they're perfumed at all, I usually will get a headache from them, so I typically don't starch my fabrics unless I absolutely have to. But the directions did say to have you starch the fabrics before cutting it out, and I understand why, because it is it's a log cabin, and you can get sort of, you know, if your 1/4 inch is not exactly straight, you can sort of get like wavy log cabins. I was just very careful when I was assembling it. I put it together during a hot spell, and I can still remember putting it together, and it was just so much fun. I did it in 2020, so it was just such a great project to keep me busy during that time. It is very beginner friendly, so if you are at all interested, highly recommend, and just gather up your favorite patriotic reds and shirtings and, you know, just some little bit of navy fabric for the middle and go from there. So much fun. For this quilt, I quilted it myself. So one of the things I forgot to say was I am a long arm quilter. I do quilt some for clients, not as much as I did before, but I quilted what I like to call the chaos motif, which just has everything. It has swirls. It has swirls with feathers. It has paisleys. Just a lot of quilting in this quilt. I just kind of went crazy and had fun with it. I do like to quilt my own personal quilts very densely. Some of them I don't, but like ones like this where they're busy all by themselves, I will go ahead and do a very dense quilt pattern. And I loved it. It was a lot of fun. Again, I long armed it on a very, very hot day, but I wanted to get this done. I think it was before the end of summer in 2020. And I loved it. It was so much fun. The next quilt that I have to talk about is another one that hangs in this room. It hangs from a wooden quilt hanger that my sister-in-law picked up for me when they were doing a sort of cross-country motorcycle road trip. I think she told me that she had found it at a farmer's market, and it's even more special to me because my sister-in-law passed away a couple of years ago, but she was always a huge champion of my quilting. I gifted many quilts to her over the years, and she also would purchase some of them for me for a fundraiser that she did every year, and that she would auction the quilts off. So she always made sure that she purchased it from me because she knew exactly how much time, money, and effort went into each and every quilt. So she was one of my biggest cheerleaders. The quilt comes out of the book Country Seat Quilts by Julie Hendrickson and Vicki Gerke. And I believe Julie owns the quilt shop JJ Stitches. And when I first saw the Betsy quilt, it was several years before they published this quilt book. Fell in love with it, but the only thing that kind of held me back was the price of shipping. And I usually do a lot of window shopping, and then I'll find a way to talk myself out of something unless I really, really love it. So when I saw that the Betsy quilt was one of the quilts being published in this particular quilt book, I jumped at it immediately. So the fabrics that I used were all Civil War reproduction that were out of my stash. I just sort of got this wild hair to make this quilt one hot summer weekend. It went together so incredibly fast. It was so much fun to put together. For the quilting on it, I did a simple meandering. I like meandering motif. I know even within the quilt group that I used to belong to, I know meandering was sort of like a bad word, but I actually like it. For me personally, I'm the type of quilter that I like the quilt to tell the story and not the quilting done on it. So I usually try, when I'm quilting quilts for myself, to find a motif that just sort of helps amplify the quilt, not the quilting, if that makes any sense. So I just did a very simple meander on it. I had a blast making this quilt. I can still remember piecing it and working on it, and I feel like it took me longer to cut it out than it did to actually sew it together. So lots of fun, very beginner friendly. If you can find this book, highly recommend it. There are so many quilts in here that I would love to make, like this one. I love it. I don't think there's one quilt in here that I wouldn't absolutely love to make. So that is probably my goal someday, is to make sure that I can make every single one of these. But loads and loads of fun. So for all of the quilts that I'm sharing today, I will make sure to put their information down in the description box. And if I can find a link to the book, I definitely will insert that down below in the description box. But again, if you can get a hold of that book, highly recommend it. So many beautiful, wonderful, and what I feel like is beginner-friendly quilts. Julie does have her online shop, JJ Stitches, so definitely go check them out because they do sell kits. And I window shop there a lot. I've never purchased from there, but definitely a lot of window shopping. I did recently finish a mini patriotic quilt right before the 4th of July. My very good and wonderful friend Retha, we got together to sew, and we always have the best time working on projects together. So many of the quilts that I've created over the years, I've created with her. So I have some amazing memories tied up in so many of my quilts, and I love that. And she is such an amazing woman, and I'm so blessed that she's my friend. But we decided that we wanted to make something a little patriotic. So from Laundry Basket Quilts, I purchased the Made in the USA mini quilt. Laundry Baskets does have a much larger flag quilt that she sells both as PDF and a paper pattern. But for this project, I just wanted to focus on something a little smaller because I do have a much larger flag quilt that I'll be showing shortly. This one was so much fun to put together. Once again, I did it with Civil War Reproduction Fabrics from my stash. And this was a great weekend project. I haven't had a chance to go out and long arm it yet. It'll probably be one that I work on in the winter because I have some other quilts that I need to get to, but where my long arm is, whatever the temperature is outside, it's about 5 degrees cooler. So I have done no long arm quilting at all summer long. So for one of the reasons why I'm looking forward to the fall is I will be able to get back out there and quilt some of the ones that have been waiting for me. But I really, really enjoyed this project. The sashing fabric that I used was a shirting fabric that has little cherries, and I was able to pick it up from the Fat Quarter shop. Love it. If they still have it available, I will link it down below. But such a fun project to put together. Haven't decided yet what type of quilting I will do on it because again, it's just a little mini quilt. I have a tiny quilt rack that is down the hallway, and this will most likely hang there next year. So such a fun project. It's actually the first laundry basket quilt pattern that I have ever worked on. I have another one that I purchased a few months ago that I'm looking forward to trying, but I felt like her patterns were very easy to read and work with, so highly recommend if you are looking for a new, not only fabric designer, because she designs some very beautiful fabrics, but she also has some amazing quilt patterns. She also has a YouTube channel where she will show and share what she's been working on, and like new product and new fabrics and new quilt patterns and all of that. So I will put a link to the Laundry Basket quilts down below, both her YouTube and her website. The next three quilts are a little bit bigger. They're probably about the size of the Constitution quilt. In fact, one of them did hang here earlier this summer. What I did yesterday is I took photos and videos of them. That way you could see what the overall quilt looks like, because I'm only going to be able to show you like bits and pieces of the quilt. Maybe going forward, I can look at doing the videos in other parts of the house, that way I can maybe show the quilts a little bit better. Space is kind of challenging. I live in a small house, lighting is an issue, and space is an issue. So right here is typically where I film all of my videos because it's a nice backdrop. It's got good lighting, but when you kind of move away from this area, that's always the challenge. And you might even see the sort of the challenge that we were facing when I was videoing and taking photos of these three quilts, because the sun had come around to the front side of the house. So it was a little bit challenging, but definitely something that I do plan on working on and perfecting a little bit as we, go along through the seasons, because I really would like to be able to share the seasonal quilts. And anyway, so this next quilt is called the Stars and Stripes quilt, and it is by Thimble Blossoms. I have made this quilt twice. The first time I made it, I had that quilt for about a year, and then my sister-in-law bought it from me. And when I first got back into collecting Civil War fabrics and some of the fabrics that I had been gifted, I decided to remake this quilt. It is the easiest and the quickest quilt I've ever made in my life. And if I needed to make a patriotic quilt for somebody, this is the one that I would 100% choose. The pattern is still very much available. And I will put a link to the Thimble Blossoms website down below. I bought mine as a PDF download, but you can purchase it as a paper pattern from them. And also I've seen it available across the web on Etsy and, various online quilt shops. So the pattern, the quilting motif that I decided to do was, again, a stipple. I tried to do a little bit smaller stipple, and I can't, my long arm quilting machine doesn't have what they call like a macro, where you can get like really tiny and tight. So this is about as tight as my long arm machine can go. She's an old lady. I've had her for many years. I think she was the second edition. She's an HQ Sweet 16. I've replaced the motor once. I just recently replaced the power box. She's had some work done on her in recent years. And every time she turns on, I'm just so happy that she turned on. But one of my most favorite quilts, this was a weekend project that I did, and I had an absolute blast. Again, playing with all the Civil War reproduction, and probably my favorite combination is this one right here. So of course I had to put it up on top, right in the middle. This next quilt typically hangs up behind me, usually in May is when I will put it out after Easter's over. So it'll be up May into maybe part of June, and then I swap it out for this one. It is called the Temecula Album Quilt. The kit itself was gifted to me by a very dear friend, and I'm so very blessed that she sent it to me. I had an amazing time putting it together. I worked on it over the course of a year, and I just tried to make sure that I could get at least one, if not two blocks done a month. Sometimes it didn't always work out, but I tried my best to sort of stay on task and work on it, and it was a lot of fun. I had a blast putting it together and then eventually seeing the whole entire quilt come to life. Once again, I am not going to be able to do justice in showing it in this small space, so I have inserted a photo and videos of the quilt. This is one that if you followed me for any length of time, you've definitely seen it many, many times. And I love it. It was so much fun to put together. So this quilt is called the Temecula Album Quilt by Temecula Quilt Company. When I was working on this, a lot of people were contacting her, wondering if the pattern was still available, and she ended up going ahead and putting it on her website for sale. So I will put a link to it down below. If you are a patriotic fan, if you love, it's not even necessarily Civil War Reproduction. I mean, you could quite honestly do this in any sort of fabric and it would look amazing. But if you love patriotic, highly recommend this particular quilt. This was another one that I quilted with a simple stipple meandering because again, I wanted the quilt to tell the story, not my quilting. And I'm sure lots of you guys would disagree. And I've seen some amazing long arming done on quilts, and it's beautiful. So much talent. I'm definitely envious of somebody who can sit down and sort of envision this intricate, all over, custom motif. But that's definitely not me. It took me many years to accept the fact that I'm just a very simple girl. But I can appreciate the beautiful artwork that goes into the quilting motifs that a lot of designers will put on quilts. But for me, again, I just like the quilt to tell its story and not the quilting, if that makes sense. But anyway, Temecula Album Quilt by Temecula Quilt Company. I'll put a link to it down below. Highly recommend if you love patriotic quilts. It was so much fun to put together. I believe that the fabric line that was used was designed by Temecula Quilt Company. I don't know if it was like a mismatch of two different lines, but it definitely was part of one of the fabric lines that she designed. You can still find bits and pieces of it across the internet because I've run into it many times, but yes, I will put whatever information about it down below in the description box if you're at all curious. This last quilt, I'm afraid I don't know who the designer was or what the name of the quilt is. This is the one that I call my Gettysburg quilt. It is full of flaws. When I first, a couple of years after I started quilting, I got a subscription to American Patchwork and Quilting and McCall's Quilting. And the pattern came out of one of those magazines. I can't even give you the pinpoint of time that they would have come out because I just don't remember. What I do remember about this quilt is I saved up so that I could buy the fabric at a local fabric store that sold Civil War Reproduction Fabrics. And I put the quilt together, 100% full of flaws. I mean, I cut points off. I didn't know any better. I mean, even today, I'm still learning. And at the time that I made that, I didn't know that you were supposed to, square up your half square triangles. I just went with it. And it is what it is. I mean, I'm not ashamed of it. I still love this quilt, flaws and all. It's still one of my favorites. I just remember working on this. I remember saving up the money for it. I remember everything about this quilt. And the other thing that I remember about it is this was the quilt that I took to my quilt group and I showed it. And the one lady told me that I was too young to be working with old lady fabrics and I needed to go work on things that were more appropriate for my age. So the quilting that I did on this was what I like to call my paisleys. It's actually the motif, the paisley motif is my husband's favorite, and he's always asking me when I'm going to put it on a quilt. And it takes a specific type of quilt, but I love this one. The quilting again is very dense, but you can get pretty playful with the motif. And I've done it to where it sort of looks like feathers. So it'll go down what you think is going to be a swirl, and then it comes back around again, and it just kind of explodes with paisleys. So you can get very creative with this specific motif, and I've used it on a lot of different ones. In fact, it's in this one, the chaos motif that I call it. There's some of it in there too, but you can just get very playful. You can get tiny, you can get big. You can shadow if you get into a corner and you can't get out of it. It's just a very forgiving motif to free motion quilt, because that's the type of quilting I do, is free motion quilting. If you follow me on Instagram or Facebook or on my FlossTube videos, you know that I have a quilt inspector general. He's absolutely adorable. His name is Freddie. He's asleep on the couch across from me, so I'm not going to disturb him, but instead I'll insert some photos of him inspecting my quilts. There was only one quilt that he wasn't a huge fan of, but most of them he's always a huge fan. He's always right there. He can be in the other room, and I can take, put in the last stitch on the sewing machine, or put in the last binding stitch, and I can lay it on the floor, and his little internal body knows, and he just saunters into the room and sniffs around, inspects it, and then he lays down if he approves. And I just absolutely love him. So I'll hopefully I've inserted those pictures. I feel like a lot of today's video will be a lot of inserted photos, because I do need to kind of figure out how I want to display the quilts that I'm talking about. And that's something that I'll just work through. But for today's video, I just felt like it was a lot easier to insert and then, just show like little snippets of the quilt here. But I definitely will get this figured out, hopefully. But I hope you enjoyed this first Quiltytube video. I had a blast making it. I do have plans, so I've written down every single month all the way to February has quilting content. So if you enjoyed today's video and you want to come back and see what I've been working on and you're brand new, I hope you will consider hitting the subscribe button. So for these videos, they'll come out every 4 weeks. I also, in between those, will have my FlossTube videos, which will be more cross-stitching related. However, if I am working on a quilt, I usually will show that at the end of those videos. I haven't been able to do any sort of quilting for myself over, gosh, well, since I finished the Mini USA quilt. Life has just been very busy. And when I do get sewing time, I'm usually working on the autumn goods that I will be putting in my Etsy shop, I hope soon. If you would like to see what I'm up to in between my videos, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm Pumpkin Hollow Quilts, or I do have a Facebook page called Pumpkin Hollow Quilting, and I'll put a link to both of those places down below. All of the quilts that I shared and showed in today's video will be listed down below in the description box. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section, and I will do my absolute best to answer them. Sometimes with fabric lines, or especially with some of the quilts that I make, I do tend to make scrappy quilts. So some of the fabric information I won't know, but I can maybe help us, point you in the direction of where you might be able to, start purchasing scrappy fabrics for your quilts. Anyway, thank you so very much for stopping by today. I do very greatly appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will see you all again in 4 weeks with the next one.